Of something that Lenin once said. There are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. It's been one of those weeks. The Donald and Little Rocket Man making nice, a chilling return to the Cold War at home and a new standoff between the British government and Brussels over the very future of the city. As time seems to accelerate, how much can we pack into the next hour? Well, to update us on the British government response to that attempted murder and to discuss whether he has at last got room to spend a little bit more, I'm joined by the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. And from Berlin, Marina Litvinenko, the woman whose husband was murdered. She thinks on the orders of the Kremlin to tell us what she wants from Theresa May now. Now, I've already quoted Lenin already. I wonder whether John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, who is in Dundee, can top that when he speaks to us later on. And with the Ides of March coming up this week, Thursday, it's appropriate to be talking about those swaggering populists, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, wowing the plebs at London's newest theatre. I've been talking to the actor David Morrissey and the director Sir Nicholas Heitner.
Were I Brutus Antony, there were an Antony could ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that would move the stones of Rome to rise a mutiny.
And reviewing the news today, The Guardian's political editor Anushka Astana and the Daily Mail's Amanda Platel. All of that coming up soon, but first, the news with Ben Thompson.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning. BBC News has learned that traces of the nerve agent used to poison a former Russian spy and his daughter have been found in a branch of the Italian restaurant Zizi that they visited in Salisbury. Sergei and Yulia Skripal remain in a critical condition in hospital nearly a week after they were taken ill. No one who was in the restaurant at the same time is thought to be in danger. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, is arguing that there is light at the end of the tunnel for the economy as he prepares for his spring statement this week. The Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has criticised his approach, saying the Conservatives cannot deliver the change the country needs. President Trump has said he thinks North Korea wants to make peace. He said Pyongyang had promised to halt missile tests while it held meetings with the United States and believed it would honour the commitment. Mr. Trump says he'll meet the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, to discuss the regime's nuclear programme. Speaking in Pennsylvania, he said the discussions could end in failure or result in the greatest deal for the world. The water industry regulator for England and Wales is to investigate why thousands of homes suffered shortages or a total loss of supply following the recent cold weather. Ofwat says the review will determine whether companies had proper contingency plans in place and are offering enough compensation to those affected. And a charity co-founded by Bono has apologised after staff made claims of bullying, harassment and abuse. The One organisation said workers at its office in Johannesburg had alleged that they were belittled and subjected to sexist comments. In a statement, Bono said the charity's new chief executive had taken decisive action to address the matter. That's all from me for now. The next news is on BBC One at 1 o'clock. Andrew, back to you.
Many thanks. Now, as I said, a head-spinning morning for news, lots going on, but the papers have more or less decided what the main story is. There's the Sunday Telegraph, corrupt Russians face UK visa ban, suggesting the Magnitsky Act, which is a tough American-Canadian act against misbehaving Russians, is going to be applied in Britain. There's the Sunday Times, got a different take on the story. They're talking about all the Russians who've been paying large amounts of money into the Conservative Party's coffers. Marina Litvinenko, who's going to be on the programme shortly, has been talking about that story as well. The Mail on Sunday has gone on another charity scandal story, this time Bono's charity One. And then, interesting, I keep attacking the red tops in this programme for not doing serious stories on the front page. Lots and lots of people with their clothes off instead. But so, shout out to the Sunday people. 8 targets on Putin's UK hit list. They have identified another 8, mainly Russian people, who they think are going to be next. This is the beginning of the story, not the end. And there's the Sunday Express. Spy poison was in a parcel, they say. Was it in Zizi? Was it in a parcel? Was it in flowers? We'll talk about that much more. And then there's the Observer, following International Women's Day. today have a story about top-paid men outstripping women by 4-1. Shock figures reveal. Not Carrie Gracie, but an actor on the front page of the story for once. OK, you are beautifully coordinated. Thank you very much. This is Tangerine Dream. Tangerine Dream. But we're going to start off with the Russian story.
Yes, Andrew, look, it's... Every paper seems to have a different take on this. As you said, in the People, they've got a former Russian spy who says that the Russians tried to poison him. He's all over the People with these other spies that he says are on the hit list. They say it was in the restaurant. The poison was in the restaurant. The Sunday Express says the poison was in a parcel that was sent to his home. The Mail on Sunday says it was in the flowers by the grave. So I guess the one thing we can learn from all this... No one has a clue. But what really strikes me about all of this, we've got the government saying, you know, we're doing a fantastic job, that, you know, we're taking this all really seriously. Why then, when a known double agent, former Russian spy, was found with his daughter frothing at the mouth on a park bench in rural England with his daughter beside him, didn't an alarm bell go off? Why didn't someone say, you know, maybe we should actually get someone in, this may be a poisoning? I mean, it took days, didn't it? It took days. It was something like 5 days before they got the army in to even take that ambulance away that he was carried to the hospital in. It just seems insane.
And in terms of the political response, two big front-page stories, one the Sunday Times, one the Telegraph. The Sunday Times focusing on all the money, as I was saying, going into the Conservative Party's coffers from prominent Russians.
Yeah, you get a very different impression of the government's response to Salisbury if you read either of these papers. The Sunday Telegraph basically saying that they're going to, you know, make it harder for people to get visas with the Magnitsky Act that you were talking about. Although, frankly, if someone's guilty of an extrajudicial murder, you'd like to think that it would be quite difficult to get visas. But yeah, the Sunday Times, totally different approach to this. This is about the government's links to Russian oligarchs and the amount of money that has been given to the Conservative Party in particular. When Theresa May first came into power, aides said that she would sup with a long spoon when it came to Moscow. Well, it turns out that the long spoon was quite effective at getting quite a lot of money in, £826,000 from Russian-linked supporters since July 2016.
At this stage, we should say we have no proven link to the Kremlin. This is all supposition.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just kind of trying to...
There are nice Russians, aren't there? They're very nice Russian billionaires that are here.
There are plenty of nice Russians. The Sunday Times is clearly linking this to the Salisbury thing in some ways, because they have quotes in here where they have cabinet ministers privately accusing the Prime Minister of a limp response. And apparently people were furious when she slapped down Boris Johnson in a cabinet meeting for saying Russia was responsible for the poisoning. I wonder who briefed that.
Well, she actually also said this week, didn't she, that when we find out who's responsible for this, there will be serious repercussions. It took them nearly 10 years to get I can never pronounce his name. Litvinenko. And, you know, by that time, they're planning to ban going to the World Cup. We'll have played in Russia, we'll have played in Qatar before they've even decided if it's state-funded. And as you say,
but we're not sending a junior minister. That will scare them. That will scare them. OK, next story, please, chaps.
OK, what do we want?
Oh. OK, the Sun. Yeah. Oh, yes, the Sun.
We want to talk about the Sun. We want to talk about, as you have Philip Hammond on today.
A really important interview in the Sun, but they didn't put it on the front page.
Oh, look, it's very mean of them. They didn't put it on the front page. They did put it a little bit on page 2. But he's here to give us great news. Austerity's over. The light is shining again. And he's also, one thing I do like, is he's given a big plug for tackling the scourge of plastic. But I think other people might be worried about...
When you read through his piece, what he's saying is unemployment's down, wages are up nearly 3%.
Manufacturing's up.
Manufacturing's up. Yeah. We've had 2 quarters now in which we're paying off the debt day to day. You know, the so-called end of austerity. It's a very, very sunlit uplands message.
Yeah, I mean, Philip Hammond has us walking into the light, although two things we can be sure of. Well, one thing we can be sure of, he's not going to switch the light on Tuesday, because if expectation management is to be believed, he's going to do hardly anything at all when it comes to the spring statement. But also, before the light, quite a lot of darkness. This story here in The Observer about millions of families basically facing the deepest benefit cuts in years. These are things that have already been announced but are coming into action this year, and they're going to hit 11 million families, many of them the just about managing group that the government says it wants to help. And I do think you have to be careful with the language you use around austerity. More than one politician has got in trouble previously for suggesting that we're about to start prancing into the sunny.
Absolutely.
I don't think he's going to be all that prancing today, do you? I think it'll be more...
we'll be watching and hoping for a bit of prance.
I would like some prance.
Prance. Now, great cartoon on the big story of the week, really.
It's a hugely important story that Donald Trump tweeted that he's going to meet up with the North Korean leader. And you don't often get a story completely encapsulated in one cartoon. The short, fat, maniac rocket man, I believe, says Trump. The old mentally deranged dotard, I presume, with a nice nuclear warhead there.
And we should say this is a very, very clever take on a famous cartoon by David Lowe. He was the great wartime cartoonist, and that was originally the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Stalin... That was Hitler, that was Stalin. And it's a very, very clever, beautifully drawn and very accurate take on one of the world's most famous cartoons. So
I think he's showing off, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, we don't need to say any more about that.
And then this is back to domestic politics, but I love this. You know when you use WhatsApp and you think that it's really quite private?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that it doesn't always work that way. This is a massive leak to BuzzFeed of the WhatsApp messages between the European Research Group, which is essentially the Tories' backbench Brexiteers. And it starts off with their response when Anna Soubry, ardent Remainer, essentially said that Theresa May should fling them out of the party. And I love this. Ian Duncan Smith, former leader, you can just imagine his tone on this, comes in. My suggestion is that colleagues should not engage in this. Although immediately they engage. Yeah. We have a message here from Anne Main, the MP for St Albans, who basically says she wants a badge with 35 stars, which is the number that Anna Soubry said there were of Brexiteers, a pair of swivel eyes, and I shall wear it with pride. And then a few minutes later, she added, stay focused, we march on to win. And don't forget, they're not a big fan of Philip Hammond. They actually repeatedly call him Philly No Mates.
Very, very mean. But this is what this is one of those what they are really thinking stories. They come onto programmes and they're very, very restrained in their language. Between themselves, they're furious.
Yeah, and they even have agreed to, lines that they're agreeing to take. And they're really furious about some of the things Theresa May has done, really furious about the idea that EU citizens will continue to have free movement during transition. It's really quite telling. And
as it's a Sunday morning, you're not reading out some of the more abusive bits that
swear words.
We're not having any of them.
So that's divisions on the Conservative side of the divide, but there's a lot of it as well about this titanic struggle going on in the Labour Party for the General Secretaryship with John Lansman, creator... I don't know if Momentum has leaders, but creator and co-leader of Momentum on the one side, and then the Unite candidate on the other, Jenny Formby. So it's unions versus the mass movement is the challenge facing the Labour Party. Yeah,
groups which you thought were on the same side. But, the leadership appears to be more backing the Unite candidate in this. But John Lansman clearly wanted to throw it open. I thought it was quite nice. He suggested that female members of the Labour Party should feel free to come forward and put their names forward. And now there's a kind of inspired by Lansman hashtag with loads of women applying for the role. So let's see where that goes.
It's a genuine, interesting problem for them in a sense, because the unions have always been at the heart of the Labour movement right from the start, and yet they've now got, I think, the most successful mass membership party in Europe, and they want to give those people some power.
And they're isolating them.
Well, that's what John Lansman's background to this is, that he believes that the members should have the power.
Yeah. Politicians fighting like rats in sacks. No surprises.
There's a new story. OK, what next?
Do you want to do dogs?
Yes, let's do dogs.
I think on a Sunday morning,
it's
just Crufts is on at the moment, and it's completely captivating. I mean, although when you see these wonderful animals just sort of, running along with all their beautiful fur flying around, this is what the poor little guys look like beforehand. I mean, I wouldn't even do that to myself to get back my hair looking good. Would you?
Not.
No, indeed.
But it's worth the watch, and I think the final might even be tonight.
You've got a very interesting story there about a graduate suing, I think, Anushka.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So essentially, this graduate, who was from Hong Kong but is now living in London, came and applied for a degree at Anglia Ruskin University. And one of the promises in the prospectus was you're going to have massive opportunities for employment afterwards. Well, she has concluded that it was in fact a Mickey Mouse degree, and she doesn't have all those opportunities. And she's actually suing the university because, and this is the thing that's changing, students essentially are seeing themselves as customers now and saying, am I going to get what you are promising? She's actually saying my degree wasn't tough enough. it wasn't tough enough. And, you know, there's a quite interesting bit here where she says, the claim includes allegations that one lecturer arrived late for lessons, finished early, and occasionally simply told students to self-study. But
So,
I thought universities were all about self-study.
Okay.
So there you go.
Just as we finish, it was International Women's Day, but today is Mother's Day.
This
Much
is a
more tradition.
wonderful
Mothering
day.
Sunday.
This is wonderful. Gary Oldman, you know, fresh from his Oscar win, he's with his mum on Mother's Day, and I think the lovely thing about him is it's not just that he goes on about his mum as he did in his speech. When he moved to America, he brought her over with him. The last few years when she got really frail, she now lives with him. That's the way to treat your mum. Did you remember to send your mum flowers?
I did. Thanks, Mum. I did. She got them. I know that, so I'm all right this year.
Time to stick the kettle on.
Thank you both very, very much indeed. Now then, for anyone with half a memory, the Salisbury nerve agent attack is horribly reminiscent of the murder of Alexander or Sasha Litvinenko, killed in central London in a plot which a public inquiry concluded was probably approved by Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. Marina Litvinenko, his widow, now joins us from Berlin. Thank you for joining us. This must have brought back terrible memories, the Skripal attack in Salisbury. Can you tell us how you first responded when you heard the news?
Very good morning. Yes, it was a very difficult moment when I received this news, because I believed it's never ever happened again after public inquiry provided all evidence of death of my husband. But unfortunately it did happen, and now I'm reading every day a news from Salisbury and try to understand what actually happened and who might be behind of this crime.
Your husband was murdered 12 years ago, and then you fought very hard for a public inquiry. And after that public inquiry reported and suggested there was probably a Kremlin link, you got a letter, I think, from Theresa May, then the Home Secretary.
Yes, we had a meeting and we had discussion about what we might achieve after this public inquiry verdict. And after this meeting, I received a letter, and actually, I would like to notice what was saying in this letter at the end. I and this government am clear that we must continue to pursue justice for your husband's killing, and that we will take every step to protect the UK and its people from such a crime ever being repeated. But unfortunately, it happened again. It means something was not done, and a lesson what we received after murder of my husband was not learned.
What more do you think the British government could have done after that inquiry and the murder of your husband that it didn't do?
We understand relationship between two countries as Russia and UK need to be in a very high level. But we know Russia never support investigation of killing my husband. We know nobody was punished, and people who've been a killer of my husband, and we know they are not even suspect because police investigation was provided all evidence, they still be in Russia. And Lugovo even, he is a member of parliament, and British parliament still communicate to this parliament where the mother of my husband is a member.
Going back to the Salisbury attacks, of course, at this stage, we don't have any proof of Russian involvement. How sure are you that this was a Russian attack?
Of course, Russia has a very bad reputation now, and everything has happened in the world, or is as doping in a sport, or is involvement in election, immediately Russia in a front of all mind. But in this case, I would like to be very serious and take its all evidence, and maybe sometimes to provide the truth, and was it exactly Russia or any other country behind of this crime. For us, it was almost 10 years to provide this all fact and evidence, and it was all proof. And I want the same case would be made in the same way. It would be not politically motivated, and only after proper investigation we could say exactly who behind of this crime.
Because there is a sense at the moment that Moscow is almost laughing at Britain. I mean, President Putin talked about his enemies swallowing poison, and then a presenter on one of the Russian television programs was joking about Britain being a very dangerous place for Russian traitors. They kept falling out of windows, and the climate was very bad for them, as if the whole thing was a joke. Do you think Britain is being treated as a bit of a joke by Moscow at the moment?
Of course, it's a very bad joke, but it's a very important British society and government will understand these words and take it really serious. And all what we're talking about, sanctions or reaction for what happened in Salisbury, need to be very serious. Even now, what was saying from Moscow, you need to react and you need to understand, is there some kind of message? And you just not just relax and take it without any reaction after that.
So in her letter to you, Theresa May said, when she was Home Secretary, that we're going to take every step to protect the UK and its people from such a crime ever being repeated. What is your message to Theresa May now?
You need to be very selected who you are friend with. And when you allow people with money come to your country and make a business, you need to be sure what kind of money these people try to bring to your country. Because very often this money were stolen from Russian people. And sometimes it's a very serious crime behind of this money. And I'm absolutely solidarity with this all question and asking to unite it with all this action what was already done in United States, in Europe. So, I think UK has to do the same steps.
Indeed. You've commented already on the amount of Russian money that has gone to the Conservative Party as a donations. Do you think the Conservative Party should hand that money back?
I agree with this. Because, again, you don't know what kind of money you accept. We're talking about reputation. And I think this meaning very serious now. Your reputation has to be very clear, particularly in politics.
You're in Berlin at the moment, but you're a resident of the UK yourself. You live in Britain. Do you yourself feel safe in Britain?
Since what happened with my husband, I receive this question almost every my interview. You know, you can't say for 100%, but I would like to feel safe. I would like my son will safe because we are both British, and I would like all British people will feel safe.
Marina Litvinenko, thank you very much for talking to us. Now then, to the weather. The month started wildly, but it's getting milder. You may know the old saying that March weather comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb. Louise Lear has more details.
Thank you. Well, you're quite right, actually, Andrew. It has been a relatively unsettled start to the month, hasn't it? But things through the morning, well, it looks as though we'll see some early morning fog lifting away, and we've actually had some sunny spells, as you can see from this Weather Watchers picture sent in earlier on as well. We are actually surrounded by weather fronts topping and tailing the country. In this area of low pressure, well, that is going to be a bit more of a player later on today. But if we take a look at the recent radar picture, the rain really just confining itself to the far north of Scotland, fringing eastern England, and also we're just starting to see the first signs of that rain pushing into the southwest. Ahead of it, there will be one or two scattered showers. So for the rest of Mothering Sunday, it looks likely to be a case of sunny spells and scattered showers across England and Wales. The best of the weather certainly looks likely to be through northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and it will be a little bit milder than it has been of late up here, 10 or 11 degrees. Perhaps not quite as warm as yesterday across England and Wales if we keep some showers coming through, but nevertheless not a bad afternoon. We'll see a spell of more organised rain as that area of low pressure moves in, and it will move its way steadily north and west to start off our Monday morning. Cooler with a touch of sheltered frost in Scotland, but a decent day up here for tomorrow. Take care.
Now then, coming up later this morning as the investigation into that nerve agent attack in Salisbury continues, Sarah Smith will be talking to the former Home Secretary Jack Straw and the former Security Minister Pauline Neville-Jones. Great bookings. Also live on the programme, the Universities Minister Sam Gimya. That's the Sunday Politics at 11 here on BBC One. And so, back up north to my hometown, Dundee, where the Scottish Labour Party conference is underway. Today's keynote speaker is the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, and he joins us now. John McDonnell, welcome. Can I ask you, first of all, about the story we've been talking about so far on the programme a lot, the poisoning attack in Salisbury. There is a suggestion in today's papers that the so-called Magnitsky Act, which really cracks down on Russian money coming into this country, removes visas and so on, should be applied in Britain too. Do you agree with that?
Yes, the Labour Party moved amendments to the money laundering bill only a week ago to introduce the Magnitsky clause. At that stage, the Conservative Party opposed our amendments. We hope now that they'll enable us to bring those amendments back at report stage of the bill so that we can have effective action. Because what Magnitsky does, it identifies those individuals who are basically found guilty of human rights abuses in particular. It prevents them then operating or having bank accounts in our country, and it effectively closes down all cooperation with them. Now, I think that could be remarkably effective. It was introduced several years ago by the Obama administration. We put amendments up, as I say, over a week ago. I don't know why the Conservatives opposed them. They said there were some technical issues. In fact, there was a bit of panic among Conservative ranks on the committee. Okay. Let's now work together on this, and let's use this effective legislation.
If this does prove to be a Russian attack, and I have to keep saying if, because we don't know yet, but if it does, then clearly there needs to be a very strong British response. Mrs. Litvinenko was suggesting that after the report into her husband's murder, the response simply wasn't strong enough. What would the Labour Party like to see if you were in power now?
We've got to work, of course, let's see the outcome of the investigation. You're quite right, we can't leap to any conclusions at the moment, but it doesn't matter whichever state it is. We've got to use every diplomatic method we can, linked up with our European and other global allies, to ensure that we isolate that particular administration if it is a state that's involved in this. It may well be a criminal operation, we don't know at the moment, but if it is a state, we cannot tolerate another state putting at risk people, our own citizens or people living in this country. So we've got to isolate them. And as I say, I think one of the methods we can do that, even if it's not the state and it's around an individual, is the sort of measures like the Magnitsky clauses that we were putting forward.
One very clear thing that you could do is stop appearing on Russia Today, which has been described by one of your own ministers as a Kremlin propaganda vehicle.
I think that's right now, and that's what I'll be doing. I've appeared on it in the past, sometimes to challenge some of the issues internationally and also to raise issues here that we're concerned about in terms of, well, not just Russia's role, but also the international scene overall. And I think that's right, because I think from what we're seeing from Russia Today at times goes beyond objective journalism from what I've seen. So, yes, I think that's right.
So this is a change in direction. Peter O'Dowd, your deputy, was on Russia Today only yesterday. Are you going to be encouraging the rest of your colleagues to follow that lead?
Yes, I am, because I've been looking overnight at some of what's happening in terms of changes in coverage on Russian television in particular, and I think we have to step back now. And I can understand why people have up until now, because we've treated it like every other television station. We've tried to be fair and making sure that, again, any country's television station, we try to be fair with them. And as long as they abide by journalistic standards, which are objective, that's fine. But it looks as though they've gone beyond that line. So, yes, we'll be having that discussion.
I mean, with respect, it was never really like any other television station, was it? Tom Watson, the deputy leader, said that Russia Today was reporting false or inaccurate stories and aligned its editorial policy to that of President Putin's Russian state. And that was back in November.
Well, at times there's been examples of that, and I think now we need to take those into account, especially in this current climate, and that's what we'll do.
Let me turn to the economic story of the day, I suppose, which is that rare thing, a cheerful Philip Hammond statement in The Sun today, when he talks about wages going up by nearly 3%. He talks about paying off the day-to-day debt, finally, suggests the end of austerity. The sunlit uplands are ahead. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Now, putting aside the politics, can you at least give 2 cheers for what appears to be a change in the economic story in this country?
No, because I don't think it's accurate. Last year, we had the lowest economic growth in the G7 countries, so we shouldn't be celebrating that. Austerity, this isn't me saying it, the head of the OBR has said it, the austerity is holding growth back. And wages now, wages are below what they were in 2007, 2008, below the banking crisis. So this isn't a matter of celebration. And you know, in terms of the deficit, we were promised by the Conservatives that they would wipe the deficit out completely 3 years ago. But I think it's not. I think what he's done, very cleverly, to be honest, very cunningly, he's shifted the deficit onto the shoulders of NHS managers, onto the shoulders of head teachers, and onto the shoulders of local government leaders. And his own local government leaders, Conservative council leaders now, are saying, I quote his own council leader in Surrey, that they're facing a financial crisis because the government cut back. So this isn't a matter of celebration. I think actually he should be coming into the real world, because as the Resolution Foundation have said in their reports today, 11 million people now, not just the poorest, but those just about managing, are going to be hit next month by the cuts in the support that they get through the benefit system. So this isn't a matter for celebration by any means.
Nevertheless, pay has been rising at an annual rate of 2.9% over the past 6 months. We've had the two strongest quarters of productivity growth, and the current budget surplus for the first time since 2002. Something is happening out there.
Well, look, you say on pay, inflation, pay is simply, at the moment, just about matching inflation, that's all. And then let's say that what else he promised, that they would lift the pay cap. Look at what they're doing to health workers. They're offering them literally just a standstill wage increase, and then they're forcing them to give up a day's holiday pay. These are people who work long hours, dedicated staff in a vocation. I think it's just miserly, and I think it's mean-spirited, and this is the sort of thing we should be condemning, not celebrating.
Let me ask you about your own plans. You've said recently that your objectives are socialist, no surprise there. This means an irreversible shift in the balance of power and wealth in favour of ordinary people. When you say irreversible, what do you mean by that? Because governments come in, they have policies, they're replaced, the policies are replaced, and so on. What is
Well, let's take the example of the Attlee government. What they did, they won the argument about how we manage our economy, and they won it for a generation, about how we manage the economy in the interests of everybody, how we establish a welfare state so everyone is looked after and cared for, how we give everyone a free education, free NHS. They won the argument for a whole generation. I think we're winning the argument now, and I think by embedding those, the understanding of how the economy could work for everybody, we'll be able to have irreversible change in this country.
Just round the corner from you in my hometown, there's lots of fishing communities up and down the East Coast in both directions, traditional fishing communities. Can I ask you, you have your own version when it comes to Brexit of cherry picking, in the sense that you want changes on state aid and workers' rights and so forth. So you need to have a proper negotiation in turn with Brussels. Would you be prepared to see continental-based fishing fleets coming into British waters as part of that negotiation?
Look, we want to ensure that our own fisher people lead the discussions that we're having about our future fishing industry. And what they're saying to us is, in any negotiations, you've got to ensure that our livelihoods are protected, but also you've got to ensure that the stock of fish is protected. So when we go into the negotiations, they're the people we'll be listening to.
Now, of course, you say when you go into the negotiations, isn't the truth that it's much likelier, if you become Chancellor, that you become Chancellor after this deal is done? And in that context, can I ask you about the impact assessments you'll have seen this week? The government's produced lots of impact assessments about possible outcomes. Do you think they're, broadly speaking, accurate?
I'm anxious. I'm anxious about some of those impact assessments, because it does reflect, I think, the nature of the negotiations as they now are. It does reflect, I think, the inability of our current government to secure a decent negotiated settlement. And I think if you change the style of the negotiations, worked on the basis, and I've said this to you before, Andrew, I think that if you change the tone of these negotiations, so you recognise that we're negotiating on the basis of mutual interest and mutual benefit, we can actually, we can protect our economy and we can protect jobs. That's what we'll do in those negotiations.
So if these impact assessments are in any way accurate, this is quite bad news for any Chancellor of any stripe coming in. Tony Blair, I don't normally quote Tony Blair to you, but I'm going to today, said it's going to be extremely difficult, he said, for Labour to deliver on its promises if it puts itself in the same sort of position on Brexit. It will find it has less money to deal with the country's problems, and it'll going to be distracted by dealing with Brexit rather than the health service, jobs and living standards. He has got a point there. You are going to come in, possibly in a situation where you have a lot of trouble on your plate about Brexit, and yet you want a huge change in economic direction.
Well, I welcome Tony Blair's advice, obviously, but I'm saying this to you. Of course, I know we could inherit a real mess as a result of, the way the government is negotiating with the EU. I understand that. They are making, a Horlicks of it, I think someone on their own side described it as. I understand that. But I think we can resolve those matters by ensuring that we have Well, cooperation in those negotiations. We don't flounce about saying, though, no deal is better.
Right.
You know, no deal is better than any bad deal. All this sort of stuff, threatening to walk away from the table. We've got to negotiate in the interests of our country and bring our country back together again. From day to day, Andrew, I do not know in this government who is negotiating on behalf, because they keep falling out in cabinet all the time.
OK, well, listen, we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but for now, enjoy Dundee, and thank you very much indeed. Now, if you haven't heard of the BBC's podcast about all things Brexit, it's called Brexit Cast, and they'll be marking 1 year to go until we leave the EU, with a special edition live at the BBC Radio Theatre in London. And you can apply to join the audience at bbc.co.uk/shows and tours. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar has always been popular, but it really seems to be speaking to today's politics, with its knife-in-the-back plots and out-of-touch elite and rabble-rousing demagogues. This is not simply a history play. Sir Nicholas Hytner has directed a new version in which audience members become part of the action itself, joining the mob on the floor of the Bridge Theatre, London's newest venue. Recently, I caught up with him and with David Morrissey, who plays Mark Antony.
We all stand up against the spirit of Caesar, and in the spirit of men there is no blood. That we then could come by Caesar's spirit and not dismember Caesar, but alas, he must bleed for it.
Were I Brutus, Brutus Antony, there were an Antony could ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar, that would move the stones of Rome to rise a mutiny. I've been really knocked out by the response to the play being performed in this way, that you are interacting with people, that you see them as the crowd reacting to you every step of the way. And, you know, it's, for the people on the floor, they're having one experience. For the people in the seats, when I speak to them, they say it's like seeing a sea of people. And they ask me whether they're planted or they're stage managed, and I went, no, they just find their place. And it's really exciting.
Eye contact the whole
You make
time.
eye
Those
contact,
great
you're
speeches,
touching them, you're bringing them around, you know, they shout things out. There's something, the play starts with a holiday. It's a party, you know, they're having a party, and that gets rudely interrupted. And the crowd really responds to that rude interruption. They really don't like it.
Yeah, they tell them to go home.
Yeah.
That's the first line of the play. Home, you idle creatures, get you home. It's a pretty good way to start a play, to tell the audience to get out. It's,
And this is a very fashionable play at the moment, Julius Caesar. It's fashionable in the States and it's fashionable here. There's another production of it as well. Why is this play so much of the moment?
What's so interesting about it in the European context is the way it explores the failures of liberalism. The people who killed Julius Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, the conspirators, they aren't revolutionaries.
They're the intellectual elite.
They are the metropolitan elite. And what goes wrong for them is they don't know how to bring the mob, the people, with them. They are, many of them, people of great integrity. Brutus does have a terrific intellectual and emotional integrity, but he's too arrogant to know how to sell the necessity of his project to the rest of the Roman population.
So, Mark Antony, you are a brilliant, brilliant demagogue. Just explain to people who don't know the play a little bit about how you're able to take the crowd in your hand and manipulate them.
Well, what happens is that there's the funeral of Caesar, and he is allowed by Brutus and Cassius to make a speech. And what Mark Antony does is he's able to turn the crowd around by appealing to the security of yesterday, and also saying, hey, I'm one of you. I'm like you. I come from your place. I walk like you. I talk like you. I want the same things as you. I'm not like those guys who are intellectuals, who are scholars. They're the ones who are telling you what you need to have and what you need to do. But I know you people.
Nick, it's a great deal of fun in a kind of grim way, this production. There's a lot of things going on, smoke and machine guns and rock music and all the rest of it. And you have talked in your recent autobiography about the tension between art on the one hand and showbiz on the other, because we want to come to be entertained as well. Just tell us a little bit about how you deal with that in a play like Julius Caesar.
Well, when you start with Shakespeare, you're starting with the great master of that balance between substance and entertainment, between art and show business, because Shakespeare is always hurling at you stuff that will, in effect, silence the mob. politically, Shakespeare's none too fond of the mob. One of the few undeniable constants in Shakespeare's plays is that he
fears democracy, really.
He suspects the crowd, but as an entertainer, he knows exactly what to throw them. So ending with a big battle sequence, that's not a bad idea. Terrific set-piece speeches, terrific idea. Scenes that are none of them too long, always on to the next thing. Good jokes, gripping story.
Romans, war scenes, crowd pleasing. Let me ask you a little bit, David, about Britannia, because that's been a huge epic on Sky, and it's the Romans and the Britons.
Behold, gods of Britannia, I am Rome, and where I walk is Rome. It's written by Jez Butterworth. What is happening is the Romans are coming back to Britain for the second time because Julius Caesar couldn't hack it the first time. So there's something that they're going in the second time. It's like you're taking his crown and they're going to stay. So they're much more vicious. But they are. But also what they do is they find who hates each other and they set them off against each other, and they back. That's how they do it, and that's how they conquered most of the world, was by going in and saying, "You're all Roman now."
Let's end by talking about the Bridge and its future. This great theatre. In a sense, it's London theatre, of course, but it's reshaping the kind of geography of London culture. It's yet another big development on the east of London.
Yes, east and south, Back to the Future. Shakespeare's theatre was on the South Bank. Southwark was the great entertainment borough back 400 years ago. Even back 100 years ago, Elephant and Castle was the Piccadilly of the South. I think there is a huge amount of energy surging east in London. Great thing about here is that we can put all our shows out all over the country using National Theatre Live, which was one of the things that I started when I was at the National Theatre. Julius Caesar will be out on March 22nd. What we're hoping to do here, we have no great remit beyond putting on what we hope are terrific, thought-provoking, entertaining shows and getting as many people to see them as possible. That's our remit. If we can get them out over the whole country, all to the good.
Of the world.
Bums on seats, and in this context, feet on the floor as well. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. So, as we've heard earlier on, the Chancellor believes the economy is at last on the turn and there is light at the end of the tunnel. Well, that's a relief. But with a huge round of new welfare cuts looming and intense pressures on the health and defence budgets, does this mean he will actually put his hand in his pocket? Chancellor, I'll come on to that in a second. But can I start by asking you about this poisoning in Salisbury? If it's proved, and I say if it is proved to be an action of the Russian state, how serious is that for our relationship with the Russian government?
Well, first of all, as you say, this is a police investigation. It will be evidence-led, and we must go where the evidence takes us. So we have to allow the police investigation to take its course. But if there were to be an involvement of a foreign state evidenced by this investigation, then obviously that would be very serious indeed, and the government would respond appropriately.
You might have heard Marina Litvinenko suggesting that last time round the response wasn't nearly strong enough. And in that context, I wonder what you think now about the Magnitsky Act proposal, so-called, for much tougher visa restrictions and financial restrictions on named individuals.
Well, the proposals that were put forward actually create a power that we already have. The Home Secretary already has a power to exclude individuals from the UK if she believes that their presence here is not conducive to our national security or the public good. So it's not strictly necessary, but we're seeking to reach an accommodation with those who've put this amendment forward. Let's see if we can come to a proposal which works for everybody. OK, you were there as Foreign Secretary at the end of that Litvinenko inquiry, and you summoned in the Russian ambassador at the time. Marina Litvinenko suggests that what you did was not nearly tough enough. What's your message to her? Well, we did. The inquiry, of course, took some time, and it was some time after the events before we had the evidence from the inquiry. But we took appropriate steps. We took measures which are still in place today. But
of course, kicked out a couple of diplomats. That was about all.
But of course, the Russians have not complied with their international obligations, despite being members of the Security Council. They have continued to protect those who we seek to extradite in respect of the murder of Mr. Litvinenko.
And yet, in a sense, they are laughing at us in this country. They still think that this is a place where they can do what they like. without any serious repercussions, and London is still one of the prime places for Russian money to arrive. Do you need to look at the whole thing again?
Well, I think the police inquiry and the depth and detail, the vast resources that have been deployed, and the high-level assets that we have to be able to make these analyses show that nobody is laughing at us. This is a very serious investigation that's going on. Let's see where it leads us.
Your party has taken massive donations from Russian oligarchs and others. Do you think it's time to hand them back?
Well, look, there are very strict rules about donations to political parties. Only British citizens who are on the electoral register here can make donations to political parties. All donations are carefully vetted. They're reported to the Electoral Commission. They're recorded publicly.
The facts have changed. Isn't it time to change your mind?
Well, I think there are people in this country who are British citizens who are of Russian origin. I don't think we should taint them. We should tar them with Putin's brush. We should recognise that people come to this country from many places. They become British citizens. They live under UK law, and they should have full participation rights in our society once they're British citizens.
Light at the end of the tunnel, a turning point for the economy. You've given lots of examples about wage growth. You've talked about the effect, finally ending the austerity years of paying back the budget day by day by day, and all of that. It feels like a really, really important moment.
Well, there is light at the end of the tunnel, because what we're about to see is debt starting to fall after it's been growing for 17 continuous years. That's a very important moment for us. But we are still in the tunnel at the moment. We have to get debt down. We've got all sorts of other things we want to do. We've taken a balanced approach over the last couple of fiscal events, using flexibility that we had to continue paying down debt, but also to provide additional support to our public services, to invest in Britain's future, and to reduce taxes for families and small businesses who are feeling the pressure.
Well, for the 11 million people about to be hit by the next round of welfare cuts, is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Are you going to be able to help them in any way at all?
Well, look, there's been quite a lot of speculation in the media about what the OBR numbers will be when they're published on Tuesday. I suggest we wait until we see the numbers. This is not a fiscal event in itself. I won't be making tax or spending announcements on Tuesday. What I will be doing is signalling some areas where we want to consult ahead of the budget in the autumn. We should be very careful about looking at single sets of figures, 1 quarter or 2 quarters. We need to look at what's happening sustainably in the economy. And if there is the flexibility, the space to do something, then we'll decide in the autumn how we're going to use that. But we will continue to take a balanced approach, addressing the debt problem, investing in Britain's future, reducing taxes for hard-working families, and putting money into our public services.
Simple question. Is austerity over?
Well, most people take that to be a reference to the public sector pay cap. Yeah. And we've removed the 1% pay cap on public sector pay. As you know, unions and management right now are in discussions on a settlement for nurses and other Agenda for Change staff in the NHS, which I hope will lead to a pay settlement which satisfies workers in the NHS, but is also fair to taxpayers, because it tackles some of the challenges that we have in the NHS workforce and makes it more effective and efficient. The
working families affected by these welfare changes, for instance, £200 a year worse off on average, that feels like no light at all at the end of the tunnel for them. Can I ask you also about local authorities? Because all across the country, you know, Tory local authorities as well as Labour ones are screaming with pain. They feel that austerity has been pushed absolutely to the possible limits, and that they are now, in the words of one of your colleagues, facing a financial precipice. Isn't it something you absolutely have to do ahead of these local elections to give them a little bit of relief at last?
Well, just to be clear, this is not a fiscal event on Tuesday, so I won't be making fiscal announcements. Local authorities have well over £200 billion of core spending power over the 5-year period from 2015 to 2020. They've got reserves of £23 billion. That's higher than in 2010, £8 billion higher than in 2010. But look, local authorities have done an incredible job in delivering efficiencies.
And
over
they're
the
now
last
in
few
crisis.
years. And of course they're under some pressures. We understand that. At the spring budget last year, I put an extra £2 billion into social care because of the pressures there. Local authority. We've also given them.
You know it's not
we've also
enough.
given them greater flexibility through the precept in the recent local government settlement, so that local authorities now have £9 billion worth of additional dedicated spending for social services over the next 3 years.
That is an actuarial answer to people who are screaming with pain in terms of the system being absolutely a breaking point.
And look, we understand that there are pressures in the system. We look at these all the time. We discuss them with colleagues across local government and indeed in spending departments across Whitehall. And as I said, when we get to the autumn budget, we'll look at the numbers then. I'll be paving the way in this autumn budget 2018 for a spending review in 2019, which will look at public spending from 2020 onwards, what the total envelope should be, how we allocate it between individual departments and indeed local government.
You're pushing off the good news until nearer the general election. Can I ask you about another really important issue on the Tory backbenches, which is defence spending?
Yes.
Tobias Ellwood, one of your own ministers, has said 2% is just not sustainable these days. We have to go up to around 3% because of what's happened to the pound and the dollar. You know, the entire military system is in real problems. They need more tanks, they need more planes, and a lot of your colleagues on the backbenches are determined that you're going to have to do something for them.
Well, look, I was Defence Secretary for nearly
Indeed.
3 years, and I yield to no one in my admiration for the armed forces and what they do to keep Britain safe. And I also understand...
They need a bit of cash as well as
I also
admiration.
understand the huge complexity of the defence budget, some very long-term projects that are at the cutting edge of technology. But some of the media talk as if defence was being cut. Let's just be clear about the facts here.
Well,
Defence will receive more than £1 billion extra in each year of this Parliament. It's the fastest growing resource budget in Whitehall. So defence isn't being cut by any means. Now,
say that,
I accept that there are pressures on defence, including foreign exchange pressures, because quite a lot of the military equipment we use is bought in US dollars. And the Prime Minister has announced a defence modernisation programme where she and I and the Defence Secretary are working closely together on looking at these challenges. And of course we're committed to making sure that Britain is always properly defended.
But it sounds like yet more jam tomorrow. Can I read you something that Nick Timothy, your close friend, said? Mr Hammond must now declare an end to the age of austerity. The government has achieved its surplus. It can invest in the economy for the long term. It can start to increase public spending. Well,
I'm afraid Nick Timothy is ignoring the debt. We have a debt of £1.8 trillion, 86.5% of our GDP. All the international organisations recognise that that is higher than a safe level. And this isn't some ideological issue, Andrew. It's about making sure that we have the capacity to respond to any future shock to the economy. There will be economic cycles in the future. We need to be able to respond to them without taking our debt over 100% of GDP.
John Redwood, no kind of softy on these matters, wrote in a blog this week that basically the debt, in terms of if you analyse it properly, is easily sustainable, and really suggested that the austerity programme was a political choice, not an essential economic one.
Well, with the greatest respect to John Redwood, I think he's wrong. We need to get our debt lower. I think most people in this country would be horrified to be reminded that we have £65,000 worth of public debt for every household in this country. But look, what I did when I became Chancellor was change the fiscal rules. I said, we will tackle the debt, we have to tackle the debt, but we will spread out the time over which we do it a bit longer, creating a bit more flexibility so that at the same time as tackling the debt, we will also invest in Britain's future, we will also put money into Britain's public services, and we'll relieve Britain's families and small businesses with some tax breaks. That's what we've done. That's what we intend to go on doing, being balanced in our approach. It's wrong to say, as some fiscal hawks say, it's wrong to say that every penny of capacity we have has to go to paying down the debt, but it's equally wrong, as John McDonnell says, that every penny should go into additional public spending. We need a balanced approach.
I must ask you about Brexit. It's clearly going to be an incredibly complex negotiation. The Prime Minister said when I was talking to her last week that, you know, we wouldn't get the full amount of access to all markets we've got at the moment. You have a very, very complicated, grindingly complicated, difficult negotiation over the future of the City of London and financial services coming up. You spoke about that this week. Is it worth it?
Yes. Financial services is a very important part of our economy, but it's also...
Not the financial services negotiation. Is Brexit worth it?
Oh, the whole thing.
Yes,
yeah,
the whole
look,
thing.
The British people have decided. The British people decided that we are leaving the European Union, and that's what we're doing. Our job is to make sure that we get the best possible deal for Britain, that we make a smart Brexit, a Brexit that works for Britain, British jobs, British prosperity, British businesses. And that's what we're all about.
Do you accept that we're going to take some kind of economic hit, as Mr Tusk has said, and as a lot of these impact assessments suggest?
Well, look, Mr Tusk is a negotiator, and I listened to him carefully on Wednesday, and he didn't say anything that I wouldn't expect a skilled and experienced negotiator to say at the beginning of a negotiation. He basically said the deal will have to contain none of the things you want and all of the things that we want. Well, that's an opening negotiating position. I recognise it well.
OK, looking at what you have said about the importance of financial services, banking and insurance in particular, you have said again and again and again, this has to be part of a fair deal. Can I ask you, is this at last a government red line?
No, we've said, the Prime Minister said very clearly in her speech that the way to negotiate successfully with the Europeans is not to threaten, not to talk about walking away from tables or anything like that, but to engage, to talk, to discuss these things, to explore the options. The reason I think that financial services has to be part of a deal is firstly the shape of Britain's economy. Services are a very important part of our economy, and a fair deal will need to be one that covers services as well as goods. And secondly, because the financial services system in London is an asset of Europe as a whole. It serves the European economy as a whole. £1.1 trillion worth of loans to European companies facilitated through the City of London. A vast proportion of Europe's financial services business transacted through the City of London.
But you know that they are thinking differently, and the French in particular are saying you're not going to get this kind of deal. So if we get a deal that does not include financial services, that would be an unfair deal, that would be a bad deal.
Well, I don't accept your premise, Andrew, because I think we will get a deal that includes financial services. The question is how financial services are included, what the kind of access is that we're able to negotiate reciprocally, because there are many European banks operating in London, of course, as part of London's financial services.
OK, well, at least we now know what the government wants out of this negotiation. The Prime Minister's speech, your speech and many others have set out a much more detailed prospectus for the country. Have you modelled the economic effects of that?
Not yet. We haven't.
Why not?
We haven't even embarked on the negotiation yet. The next step in this process at the European Council later this month is hopefully to agree the implementation period so that businesses know that they can plan over the next 3 years with certainty. Then we will also get the guidelines from the European Union for the next phase of negotiation. Then we start talking with them about the shape of a future partnership, which will cover not just economics, trade and investment, but also security, domestic security and external security.
So modelling tomorrow, like jam tomorrow. But it will come.
Once we know what the deal looks like, then we will certainly model it.
All right, Chancellor of the thank you very much indeed. Now take a look at what's coming straight after this programme. Sorry.
Join us at 10 from Newport. We're following a week of schmoozing the Saudi Crown Prince to clinch an order for 48 Typhoon jet fighters. We ask, should Britain be proud of its arms trade? And Public Health England says we're far too fat and getting bigger. Is it any business of the government, or is obesity a matter of personal choice? See you at 10 on BBC One.
Personal choice, clearly. That's all from us for this week. Thanks to all my guests, and above all, happy Mother's Day.